Okay, it's 2:01, so we'll just get started. I'm sure there'll be others who join us shortly. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the Western Night Skies Council's second webinar in our seminar series. By way of introduction, my name is Aubrey Larson. I work for the State of Utah's Community Development Office, and I'm also coordinator for the Colorado Plateau Dark Sky Cooperative. Just as a reminder, some Zoom etiquette. We are being recorded, and if you can keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking, that will help us just with, surround sound. We do invite people to have your camera on if you'd like. If not, that's totally fine if that's a bandwidth issue. And then after the presentation, you're more than welcome to speak up and ask verbal questions, but we do have a chat feature option, which I encourage if you do have questions or comments to use the chat feature. I'm going to start off with a question. We just want to get to know the audience a little bit better. So I'm going to pop that in the chat window. Feel free to answer whenever you'd like, but I'd like to know where you're joining us from, and is there any additional info that will help us know your interest in today's topic? So go ahead and answer that question. So today's webinar, again, the title is The Minor in Dark Sky Studies, a Transdisciplinary Approach to Education. This is presented by the NAR Initiative and the Colorado Plateau Dark Sky Cooperative. If you're not familiar with NAR, it stands for Gateway and Natural Amenity Region Initiative. It is a regional hub for research, education, and outreach regarding gateway communities, and it is housed within Utah State University Extension's Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism. If you want to learn more about NAR, you can go to their website, which is gnar.usu.edu. And if you want to learn more about the Colorado Plateau Dark Sky Cooperative, I encourage you to visit cpdarkskies.org. So a little bit about the Western Night Skies Council. It's a brand new initiative. We met as a group in October. There's about 30 members representing folks from all over the 11 Western states. Purpose of the council is to share resources and information, increase dialogue, and then provide mutual support for the diverse groups of night sky conservation advocates throughout the West. And that's a mouthful. So essentially what we're all about is connection, communication, and collaboration all around this amazing topic of dark sky conservation. So today's webinar is essentially an informational session about the new Dark Sky Studies minor at the University of Utah, which is the first of its kind in the world. And we welcome Dr. Daniel Mendoza, our presenter today. I will introduce Daniel in just a minute. Our next webinar will be in April during International Dark Sky Week. It's on Thursday, April 8th, and the working title is Astrophotography, Discovering the Night. Should be a lot of fun. We have some incredible astrophotographers who will be joining and talking about their work. And Liz is posting a link to registration if you'd like to join us in April. So with that, I'm going to read Daniel's bio and then turn the time over to him today. So Dr. Daniel Mendoza holds joint appointments in the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning, Atmospheric Sciences, Pulmonary Medicine, and the Nexus Research Institute at the University of Utah. His research interests include quantifying and characterizing urban greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant emissions for use in human exposure estimation and metropolitan planning. If you want to know what that is, you're going to have to ask Daniel. He also examines the health effects associated with acute and chronic pollutant exposure, particularly in vulnerable populations. By combining expertise in air pollution, health outcomes, and urban planning, his work aims to produce actionable scientific and policy solutions to address air quality concerns. He is the co-director of the Consortium for Dark Sky Studies, serves as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dark Sky Studies, and is an instructor in the Capstone class on Dark Sky Studies at the University of Utah. As of recent months, he's been happily forced to become a drone engineer to maintain the 2 drones used in the Dark Sky Studies minor. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Daniel. Again, please use the chat feature if you have questions. We will have Daniel present and then come back for a quick Q&A session before we end today. So with that, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm getting ready right now to share my screen and my presentation. All right, can everyone see that?
Not yet, Daniel.
Okay. Let's try this again. It worked a second ago.
While Daniel's working on his presentation, I have some cheesy jokes if you're interested. Okay, here's the first one. Why did Mickey Mouse go to outer space? To find Pluto. Knee slapper. Okay, let's see. Daniel, did you find your presentation?
Yeah, it says that it's sharing the screen, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on.
Okay. I'll keep stalling. Let's see. Why did the sun go to college? Because it already had 1,000,000 degrees. Okay, I'll stop now. Welcome, Daniel Mendoza.
Great, thanks. Yeah, sorry about that. It's very strange. Anyway, I just wanted to dive right in. I'd like to come up with an interesting title. And so for Dark Sky Studies, the title is Anthology and Vision for an Ancient and Emerging Field of Study. It's actually very relevant in the sense that people have been looking at the stars ever since the beginning of civilization, but it's really been quite recently in recent few decades that people have started to see how we're losing our connection with the skies, and as people have started to really focus on improving these conditions. As Aubrey mentioned, much of my work really revolves around air quality. So I like to think of dark skies and light pollution as something that may be about 30 to 40 years behind in terms of the work that is being done in terms of air pollution. I really draw a lot of the lessons from my work in air quality to then really try to tie that into what can we do for light pollution. So, by the way, does anyone know where this picture was taken from? You can type this in the chat. I'm going to give everyone a couple seconds if anyone has any idea. Well, no, you're not allowed to answer, Aubrey, because you know where this picture's from. All right. Well, Aubrey's right. It's Ben Lomond Mountain. It's up here in Ogden, and what that really showed was the difference between the Wasatch Back, which is darker, much darker. It's really looking down towards Eden, but then also the Wasatch Front, how much more illuminated it is. So this really tells us how different a much more developed area, and I'll just scroll back to it for a second. You can really see how you get this orb of light there from the bottom, and that's a sky glow, and how we really cannot see many of the stars. You only see some of the brightest one, whereas on the left-hand side of your picture, you can actually see much more of the starry night, and that's really ideally where we're going to be headed, and even darker if possible. Catherine Coles is a faculty member in the English department, and she's written a great sonnet that was actually featured in the first issue of the Journal of Dark Sky Studies. I'll give you all a second here to read it, but it really sets a tone because of all fields that I work with, dark skies is the one that I feel has a deeper emotional connection to us. And ultimately, emotion is what drives change and ultimately what could drive policy. We can all have fond memories. Hopefully all of us have some fond memories of even recent times, or maybe much more in the past, where we've looked up at the sky and then really seen our place within the universe. So this is why with the minor in dark sky studies, we're looking at combining not just science, not just measurements or urban planning, but really trying to connect it in a deeper level. And I'll show an example of that in a minute. So I'll start here with the overview for this presentation. I'll discuss very briefly what dark sky studies are, just in case we have some newcomers, although I know that most of us are grizzled veterans of protecting our skies. And I'll talk a little bit about the implications for urban development, and then I'll describe the dark sky studies minor. So it's an old and new field. It is multidisciplinary, and really it is transdisciplinary. What we mean by this is that transdisciplinary is sort of a step beyond interdisciplinary, meaning there are many fields involved in it, but we're trying to make transformative change. So translate our work so it doesn't stay just within the realms of academia, but actually go out into the real world and make changes happen. And for in terms of health outcomes, it's an environmental exposure mechanism. Bright lights, as we all know, do have some impacts on the human level, and it's an opportunity for citizen legislative engagement. For example, one of the bills that's being considered here in Utah, we're in the legislative session. One of the bills is to look at whether we can incorporate a dark skies license plate uh, as a standard plate, not a specialty plate, not a special interest group plate, but really as one of the standard ones. If any of you who are familiar here with Utah, and again, I'm not making assumptions about who's who, but if you're here from Utah, you can see that we do have a choice of license plates. One of them is the skier. It's got the skier on there because, again, it is some of the greatest snow on the planet. Well, we have some of the darkest skies in the world, and we have the highest number of certified dark sky places. And we do have some unique features. We do have two parks that are adjacent to metropolitan areas. So we are very unique, and we actually do a lot of work here, and we want that to be recognized in the very much the same way as the snow that we all enjoy, and that is a great tourist attraction. We want to have dark skies be a great tourist attraction for people coming to Utah. So you can ski during the day, and then you can enjoy the stars at night. And one of the things that's often overlooked is that there is an immediate effect, very differently from the other half of my day job, which is air and water quality. It could take centuries for air quality to improve. It could take decades for water quality to improve. But if we flip the switch, we immediately go dark and we improve our dark sky conditions. So I could also start with what is not dark skies. As we all know, about 80% of the world can no longer see the Milky Way. And it's approximately related to urbanization level, but it actually does grow much faster than urbanization rate. And there are many reasons for that. One of them is really the poor lighting infrastructure. And it's due to lack of awareness because there is a false sense of safety. Many people think that the brighter something is, the safer one would feel or one will be. Unfortunately, that's not found to be necessarily true. And actually, many studies have shown that brighter lights are actually a punitive measure against lower income communities. That's where we see some of the most, and I'm going to freely use this word, offensive lighting. Again, for those of you who are familiar here with Utah, with Salt Lake City, there's a huge disparity that I found even just going across the city. If I go, for example, to the Avenues neighborhood, which is a wealthier, higher income community, the street lights are very warm, very yellow, not very bright. But if we go to, for example, some of the communities on the west side, Glendale, Rose Park, those lights are much brighter. They are more on the blue light spectrum, and therefore it does show that there are some socioeconomic disparities in terms of light exposure. We all know what the Bortle scale is, and for those of you who don't know, this is really sort of a gradient as to what you can see in the quality of skies. And uh, in the more in the darker areas, we actually can see even the Milky Way, which is amazing, and we can get there even just within about a 1 hour drive from Salt Lake City. We're very fortunate here. Some of the worst places in the continental US, I was reading, was DC area, because you actually have to drive anywhere between 3 to 4 hours away from, if you were in the center of downtown DC, because of course we all know that the East Coast is very highly and densely populated, to actually get to see the Milky Way, which is a shame. We also can see that this growth in terms of light pollution, and again, 2025 is projected, but we can see how, at least in the early 50s, we saw it's the eastern seaboard as expected. Some of the cities in the Midwest, Chicago jumps out. Uh, the large cities, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. But then later on, we see this fill in, and that's partially attributable to the increase in suburban areas in the 70s. And then by the year 2000, essentially half the eastern half of the US is really dark sky poor. We can see Salt Lake kind of popping up right there in the Wasatch Front, and the dreaded 2025 map is really, now dark skies are no longer something that would be abundant, but something that now has to be sought after. We can have a direct tie-in with urban development. This is the road network for 2011 and 2040, and that's a projected road network. And what we can see is the southwest part of Salt Lake County was very sparsely populated. Generally, there wasn't much built there. That's the communities of Harriman, Daybreak, some parts of South Jordan. And with new developments, with the really alarming rate of population increase in Salt Lake County, that area is actually becoming much more populated. And what we can see here, what's fairly interesting, is that, as we all know, we have I-80, we have I-15 coming down, and we had a ring road develop, which is I-215. But there's a new, this will be the Mountain View corridor. It's essentially going to be another ring road. What that means is that there will be trucks, there will be much more traffic, and of course there will be population infill. So there is definitely that growth that we need to account for, because not only are we looking at light pollution from, say, large commercial buildings and also homes, but also from highways. Part of that will also be seeing the lane miles growth and the daily vehicle miles travels growth. So what I'm trying to set the stage here for is really looking at this from all sorts of angles. And we want to really understand what could be the causes of light pollution. And in our case, it's just explosive growth, specifically in the southwestern part of the county. Of the relevant findings, and these are some of the angles that I really try to make sure that get communicated, because this is what's going to really drive the needle. Is for example, in the health side, the nurses study, which is the largest epidemiological study that has tracked nurses and across decades by now, has shown that there's depression, anxiety, blood pressure changes for nurses who are working on second and third shifts. Now, this indoor lighting is not necessarily outdoor lighting, but we do know, and we're beginning to understand more clearly, that there are direct biological responses to light exposure. In terms of the economic aspect, wasted light means wasted money, which means unnecessary CO2 production. Generally, if lights are excessive, redundant, for example, if there's a street light, but there's also light from a business, and they're basically next to each other, they're illuminating the same patch of, let's say, sidewalk, and that's just essentially wasted energy and wasted electricity. In terms of ecological aspect, I think we're all familiar with the impacts on migratory bird species. where we know that there are issues with sea turtles going the wrong way, um, really going towards land, and volunteers do turn them around. It's a big program in Miami. And then also insects and predators actually has been it's been a really interesting development here in Salt Lake, up by City Creek Canyon. If For those of you familiar with it, like that's really downtown. That's right next to the state capitol, and really the mouth of City Creek Canyon is really right downtown. Because they're slight and there's excessive light, some of the deer have actually started coming down closer to those areas, closer to the downtown areas on City Creek, and that actually brings cougars down from where they normally would be in the foothills, and that is a public safety aspect that we need to consider. There's a meta review on safety, because really that again is really what drives a lot of the opposition. People just think that the darker something is, the less safe it is. But the reality is that what causes, I say, a temporary blindness is when one goes from a very brightly lit spot to a dark spot, then to another brightly lit spot. We all know this when we're driving, for example, and then someone has their brights on behind us, and we're trying to look at the road and then try to look in a rear view mirror. That is a problem, and it's really a commitment to educate planners, stakeholders, community members, that if we dim all the lights just a little bit, then we actually first improve our dark skies, of course, but we actually make communities more safe. Because what's going to happen is, if we have two street lights and they're far away enough and we dim them, then we make a much more even distribution of light, as opposed to having a bright spot and a dark spot. And then there have been multiple studies in terms of the sociological impact. People are missing the opportunity to connect with the cosmos and use this powerful word to describe this when they actually go outside and they actually see skies. There's a large program in New York that took inner city youth who never really actually left the city on adventures outside. So it involved whitewater rafting, stargazing, all sorts of outdoor activities that are outside of their socioeconomic reach and really even within the radar at all. And they actually were amazed and wanted to go back and be able to see all of these things again. So this is something that I like to think that seeing dark skies should be a right and not a privilege. So, minor in dark sky studies. It's the first of its kind in the U.S., and we really think that it's the first formal academic program in the world. Now, this was made possible by a generous grant from the WM Keck Foundation, and this was awarded to the group working on this about 2 years ago, when we then assembled a multidisciplinary faculty team involving researchers from astronomy, atmospheric sciences, city and metropolitan planning, design, engineering, film studies, health, poetry. And really, there are several other fields, including history and Native American studies, that we brought along, because what we want to do is we want to make this as relevant to every single student that we can. We may not all be astronomers or planners, but there's always a hook. There's always something that will be interesting to someone, and that is the population we want to attract. And what we wanted to do was to, again, make this a project-based approach. We don't want to just have lectures. We actually want the students to engage in work that will matter and that will make change. So there are three classes, three core classes, along with three additional classes, or actually 9 other credit hours that need to be taken outside. And those are, we do have a curated list of classes that do fulfill the requirements, and they're from other departments. So we created 3 core classes from the very beginning. The first class is called Lightscapes, and this is more of an introductory class. This is where students really learn more and try to understand what dark skies are. Many students have no idea about this. Many of them took it simply because it seemed like an interesting class to take. And so what what we aim to do, and this is both Lightscapes and Nightscapes are taught by Valachi Ganesan and Kate McGargle. Their their aim was to make sure that every student, as I said previously, has some connection and actually feels passionate about some aspect of dark skies. We had a transdisciplinary presenting team. We had, again, the faculty members from all the departments that I listed before, but then we also had, as stakeholders, we did have representatives from UTA, the Utah Transit Authority, which is the group that runs our light rail, buses, etc. Because an important and interesting aspect, which I had not really thought about, and we didn't really weren't very aware of it, was the design, for example, of bus stops. Uh, there are many really, if we want to call it, in attempts to improve and to increase ridership. And sometimes the most obvious ones is, for example, the buses don't run often enough, or I have to make too many connections. But the evening bus trips, some of them are actually guided by the sense of safety that people feel in the bus stops or in the train stops. Are they illuminated correctly? Do people feel safe being outside? And of course, if people do not feel safe taking the bus or taking trains or public transit in general in the evening, then that probably means that they may not do their morning commute either by bus, which then that increases cars driving on the road. So it was a great success. It's been taught again. So we've had a set of ongoing classes already for Lightscapes. And at the end, the students made a really nice video where they did some surveying on campus and looked at a parking garage here that's very central to campus to try to understand what are the different angles that people may perceive the light. Some interesting findings were that right as one is exiting the garage, there's this overhead light that is blinding enough that one may not actually be seeing cars that may be taking the turn in a little bit more quickly than they should, and it could potentially cause collisions. So these findings actually have been relayed, and we did have the students' final presentation. We did have some stakeholders from the university, and they were very impressed by the thoroughness. And there is a movement within the university to make the campus more dark sky friendly. Those are some ongoing conversations. With Nightscapes, which is a second class, there was, I think the highlight of the class was a field trip to Helper. So Helper, Utah is a small community. It's located in Carbon County. So it used to be primarily an extracting industry, and now it's home to many artists who either live there full time or who go there for a residency for sort of an inspiration period. It's very beautiful. It's very quiet, and as Carbon County and many parts in Utah that used to rely on coal and other fossil fuel extraction, many of them are actually looking towards another industry, in this case, tourism, because we do have some very beautiful landscapes and we have access to dark skies, which, as I mentioned earlier, and you all should probably know, it is very inspirational to look up, see the stars. I sometimes do that if I'm working late at night. I just take 5 minute walk and look at the stars and then realize that there we find our place in the universe, and that's a very important thing for us, particularly now during our pandemic months where many of us feel social disconnect. Many of us are actually missing seeing our colleagues, seeing family members. Being able to connect to something that is greater than us has always shown to be an improvement in one's psychological condition. So the field trip to Helper took place, and there was a part of it that actually the majority of the effort there was to fly some drones that were designed by the Capstone Course in mechanical engineering. So we teamed up with a professor in mechanical engineering, Cam Lang, and his students developed this autonomous drones. And by autonomous, it means that we connect to the drone with a laptop, and we give it some coordinates, some waypoints, and the drone flies to that coordinate, to that specific elevation, and can measure light. And because of that, we're able to do a very preliminary survey of helpers' light. So took the drones over to the cemetery, which was the darkest spot in the city, and then also to Main Street. And we're able to get some very interesting measurements, and I have some results that I'll show in a minute. But it was also presenting that to the mayor and to the community at a meeting that was held there. Just explain this is what we're trying to do. One really great outcome of this was that Helper has been Dark Sky certified. So what we want to do is we want to sort of replicate this model and be able to have all our students have a meaningful collaborative experience with a community or an organization to then promote enactable change. And then in the capstone course, we're putting this all together for action, meaning we are looking at not just uh, doing, for example, a survey, not just looking at, for example, taking new classes or new lessons within dark skies, but also teaching the next generation of students. So this is what I'll describe about the capstone course. We had 4 goals. The first goal was what I consider more the planning slash science part, which was we would fly the drones and then we would take a more systematic approach to measuring across different parts of the city. So in our case, we wanted to look at 2 different schools, one in a much higher income community compared to another one that's a Title I school to see if there was a difference in light pollution. This really ties in directly to the environmental justice aspect of light pollution. That was the first goal. The second goal was to create a lasting artistic expression project, and I'll talk about that one in a minute. The third part was to uh, encourage education, and for that, we worked with both the Natural History Museum and the Salt Lake Center for Science Education, which is a science-oriented school. So we had 2 teams of students, and they worked with each of these organizations to educate students, which are primarily high school and there were some middle school students, on dark skies and the importance of preserving dark skies. One aspect that I did not mention earlier, which I think is very relevant, is that dark skies is something that we currently have and we stand to lose. And therefore, in terms of policy perspective and a sort of strategic approach, it seems to be much easier to work with stakeholders, to work with policymakers and decision makers in saying, let's do preventive work so that we don't lose it and then we have to mitigate later on. As opposed to, for example, those of you who are familiar with Utah's air quality, we already have the air quality problem, and trying to mitigate it is much more difficult than trying to avoid it to begin with. And so that's an angle that we definitely always try to work with anyone who has any stakeholder sort of either input or they can actually make some decisions. We want to stress that this is something that we have and we should try our best not to lose. So our work was with really essentially teaching the students what the minor students had learned in the first 2 classes, and then the fourth part was to then take this to a policy group or to a decision-making group. In which case, both the student groups, they went to 2 community councils. One was Glendale, one was Rose Park, and they received a very warm welcome from both community councils. And part of and I thought that was a really great idea. The students really, this project was very student-led. I gave as much input as they asked, but I wanted to see where they would take it. And one of the really great ideas that they had was when they did their presentations within the communities, what they did was they took a few minutes to present the ideas, but they actually let the own students from the community So the high school and the middle school students that they had worked with the whole semester, they gave a large amount of the presentation because they're now speaking to their own neighbors, their own neighborhood, their own community. And it's not one of a typical problem that we have run into, and I'm talking very generally in science, is that many times scientists work outside of the community. They come up with great ideas. Once they pitch it to the community, it's not necessarily as relevant. It's not necessarily what the community needed or wanted. And it wasn't necessarily presented by a stakeholder within the community. So this is why we wanted to avoid all of this and really start working with the community from the very beginning, including the students who are part of the community. And for the case of Glendale, the community council has voted or was going to vote, and I know that it's sometime in February when they're going to have their next community council meeting on implementing policies to protect. They have right now a One Glendale, that's the name of the program, to revitalize and to improve many areas of the community, that they will incorporate our dark sky suggestions to their plan, and they will be in touch with the students that were part of the Capstone class. So this is going beyond their students finish their class that was last fall, but they're still in contact with them. They still want the guidance, and this is really what we want to foster, this work, this ongoing work with communities that lasts beyond just the course. In the case of Rose Park, they did not have a specific plan that was ongoing, just like Glendale, but they were very impressed by the quality of the work of the students, and they know that we're here as a resource, and they will be in contact once they do have some ideas as to how to move forward. One of the suggestions that they did take into account was that anytime a light fixture, street light fixture broke, they will be looking to replace it with a dark sky friendly light fixture. So fully shielded and of a low color temperature. So those were some of the wins, and I think this class was extremely successful. Here's a picture of the mural that was painted. So we have two local artists, Josh and Jorge, and they along with the students. So we had the students in the minor as well as the students from the Salt Lake Center for Science Education collaborate on this mural. This was done inside. It was in the cafeteria area for Slixie, and this just really depicts. It's again almost like a Bordeaux scale picture, so we can see the Salt Lake City skyline and how, because of all the light pollution, there's very little view of the stars. Actually, I think there's essentially none. And then as we go farther away, we can actually see the Milky Way, we can see constellations, etc. So this is something that is going to be a daily reminder really to these students and to the faculty there and staff that this is something that we can be aspirational to, and it's something that's attainable. And then the last part here was, again, this is the collaboration with the mechanical engineering team. So Matthew Goodell was the lead student there in the student group there for their capstone, and we wrote a conference paper on the autonomous drone. And so this was really a great success. It was when it was submitted to the conference. It came back few small minor revisions, and then it got sent. It got accepted, and it was part of that conference. And it was really the first ever autonomous light assessment drone that's been developed. So this is another big win for the U. It's a big win for the minor, and this is really trying to push the two sides of growing the field of dark skies. We know that in terms of large funding agencies, for example, the National Science Foundation, the two things that really stand out are education and publication. And that is because if we do education and we do community outreach, that is viewed very favorably. And of course, publication does show that there's an academic basis for the work that we're doing. So this is another of the great successes here of our minor, which is just barely over a year old. So we're very proud of it. and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to just applause. There's also a reaction button if you want to virtually applaud Daniel. We're going to open up to Q&A right now, and I'm going to start with one from the chat. This is from Joshua Gilbert. He asks, can anyone take these classes, or do you need to be fully enrolled at the University of Utah?
You do need, right now, you do need to be a student, but we've been working on some certificate and distance learning courses. So that's in the works. Again, COVID has been quite challenging, as we all know, but our goal, and it really makes sense for us to do distance learning opportunities and non-degree enrollment classes, because the best guys are not in Salt Lake City. They're not on campus. The best guys are in rural areas and other places. So that is a great question. That is our next step. We'll be teaching some summer classes, and I think that after that, we're going to be fully exploring distance learning and certificate programs as well.
Great question. Other questions? I have some that I'll ask in a minute.
Well, can we just speak, or do you want us to type them in?
Speak or type them in if you don't feel comfortable talking.
So I haven't seen the syllabus and things for this class yet. I don't know if it exists, but I'm just looking at who's on this call, and there's quite a few really, really, really good lighting people from around the United States on this call. That I think there's interest in developing this class into something. I think it's really needed. That I think, in my humble opinion, that dark sky doesn't understand lighting really well. I think there tends to be a hate against lighting, and it's lighting done bad. And I'd like to see you guys work with some good lighting designers and things around the country about how to do good lighting. And so that's my interest in this class. Is I think dark sky class is awesome. I think it's really needed to learn on both sides, for lighting people to learn about dark sky and dark sky to learn about lighting. So.
Absolutely, and I think that that's again a misconception. I think that we need to work together. I think that we don't need to see lighting as the evil, and just in the same way as many people see dark skies as an evil or just darkness. So I think that, and that's part of why we wanted to make this a transdisciplinary team and working with engineers, because we need to come up with a solution that works and that is sustainable.
Right.
So thank you for that comment. We appreciate that.
I have another question in the chat from Elizabeth McDonald. She asks, could you talk more about how light pollution can be quantitatively and effectively measured by a drone?
Yes. So the drone has both a luminance and an illuminance meter. And so we're actually able to point two sensors, one looking up and one looking down. The drone, we've programmed it that it flies at 2 meters, 10 meters, and then 15 meters. The 2 meters is the lowest that the drone can really fly stably. And that kind of gives us an idea of what people can see, essentially eye height. Obviously, you're only 2 meters tall if you're a basketball player or a volleyball player, but that gives us a good proxy as to what a person sees walking on the street. And then the 10 and 15 meters are generally to get just below a street light and then just above the street light, because then that helps us see how much of the light is actually just scattered because it's not potentially well shielded, and really what are these photons going up into the ether, how are they impeding our view of a dark sky. So those are the two sensors that we have.
Thank you, Daniel. I have a question. Can you talk to us about what kinds of career opportunities you envision for these minor students and how they can take what they learn and apply it to their future professional development?
Oh, absolutely. I think that that's really one of the biggest concerns from the students is, what do we do after? And Aubrey has been essentially the linchpin here in trying to help us find opportunities. There are many organizations that that are growing and that are looking for students that have now been formally trained, as opposed to simply people who may have been avid enthusiasts. But now this program does give you a foundation, it gives you an academic basis. For example, IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, I just saw there were job postings. The Colorado Plateau uh, team also has had job postings. I know that part of the work with the Western Night Skies Council is also looking at really placing these students, because that is one of the reticence, I would say, if I were a student right now and I see that the hottest job commodity right now is some IT related, computer, Zoom related thing. Well, why would you want to go somewhere that doesn't have a clear career path? And that's what we're going to start introducing in our courses more formally, and then say, look, these are job opportunities. And we'll start with the first class and then just say, look, these are jobs that have shown up. You can have a career moving forward if you study this, because it is something that it is an environmental concern, it is a sustainability concern. And just like and this is where one can work in other industries. For example, the lighting industry is a really obvious choice. For example, now that you know about dark skies, now that you know how to measure things, well, how can we develop better things now that we know how to measure them?
We have a comment/question. Excellent presentation. I am joining from Pakistan and I am using art and costumes as an awareness tool of light pollution. How can I collaborate? I would love to share my story.
Well, my email's there. Please feel free to contact me. I'll put it here in the chat. I think my presentation just acted up again.
I'll also add the Colorado Plateau Dark Sky Cooperative does a monthly spotlight, and it's not limited to people in this geographic region. So I'll put my email in as well if you want to be one of our future spotlights. And this is for anyone who'd be interested. We're always looking for new people to spotlight. Daniel, is there any emerging research that excites you?
Yes, and actually, just before I answer that directly, there was one bit that I was, as you probably noticed, I try to cram a lot into 30 minutes. There's one important collaboration that I did not mention, that was part of the community work that we did, which we have been working with All My Relations, which is a cooperative artistic co-op in New York, and they are the majority of them are Native American artists. And we did have a grant funded to work with them. Before COVID, the plan was for them, and they've been working on a dark sky project. Aubrey, you could probably look it up. Maybe we could share the link. I'll look it up in a second. But it was it's All My Relations, and it's the revolving sky. That's the name of their project. And they actually did come into all the classes in the minor that were taught, the first class and the third class last semester. And what we wanted to do was to look at the cultural astronomy side of this. Too often, I mean, even as much as we try to put the artistic side, it does become a little bit more mechanistic. And we wanted to bring the cultural astronomy and really get the focus from the Native American communities, because they have their own way, just like we have our own way of looking at stars, understanding constellations. And we need to respect that and honor that, especially in a place like Utah that is native land, that we do still have a large Native American presence. And we need to make sure that we all work together. And we need to ensure that all cultures, all perspectives are viewed on the same level. And that's part of what we've stressed throughout our classes. We know that we have also the Maori as well in Oceania. We make sure that we also try to reach out to as many native communities that have a history, and so we preserve and honor their cultural heritage, because astronomy and looking at the stars has been it's a worldwide part, and we don't want to just focus on the we don't want to be ethnocentric to what is currently being taught or currently is available. We want to make sure that we increase the breadth for the experience for all our students. In terms of the research, I'm going to put in a plug here. I think I've got, yeah, John is there on the call. We've been working really hard on putting together another issue for the Journal of Dark Sky Studies. The first one was out almost 2 years ago, year and a half ago. So we want to actually now invite people to start thinking about potentially working on some of the research and publishing some of the research in our journal. Again, it's a similar focus as the minor. We want to make sure that we do have the creative side. We do also have the more traditional lighting, urban design, engineering, environmental exposure side, and health impacts as well. And so what we really want to do is make sure that there is a platform for anyone who's interested in this field, because sometimes some of the research doesn't really fit very well in other journals. And we want to make sure that this is a resource that's available. A very interesting piece of research here from the U that was just published was, and it really does underscore some of the thoughts that we've had and some of the ideas that we had, is that there was a student in the School of Geography. She's a PhD student. She published a paper showing satellite data in terms of, as we all know, the satellite light products, but then superimpose that with social demographic data, showing that low-income communities and communities of color are impacted by brighter night lights. And this is, again, another social justice aspect that we're very interested in developing, particularly with what we're seeing in the past few months. That this is definitely something that we see is impacting. So not only are these communities being impacted by worse air quality, we already know water quality as well. Now light quality is definitely something that we want to be focusing on.
Thank you, Daniel. We have a comment from Sophie Frankenberg, who I know is involved with the minor. She says, if any of your dark sky organizations, communities are interested in establishing an internship opportunity for dark sky study students, please feel free to contact me. We love passing opportunities along to the students, and then her email can be found there in the chat, sophie.frankenberg@utah.edu. And I'll just echo Daniel in saying that that is one of the goals of the Western Night Skies Council, is to connect students and young professionals with internships and career opportunities. We have another comment from Joshua. You mentioned teaching some communities about the need for dark skies. Is there a strategy to send information to small growing communities that will inherently be adding lights as they grow so that they can do it appropriately? And then list some examples, including Tory and people building Airbnb rental homes.
That is right now outside the scope of the minor. I think this is where we rely on other organizations, such as the Western Night Skies Council, IDA, etc., that they can pass on the message. I think at this point right now, officially what we're tasked to do is to be teaching these courses and then working with the communities that we're most closely with. Your example about Airbnb is something that we see. People want bigger, brighter, better, and I see this, for example, even the ski resorts. I recently conducted a very brief survey of Alta because some of the residents were concerned that the ski resorts are just so bright. It's not that I avoid conflict, but I think it's a little bit outside of the scope of the minor to directly target, unless we're asked. If we're asked by a community such as Helper to go in there and help, we'll do that, but not necessarily out of our own impetus go somewhere. So that's I guess my answer on this.
Liz also mentioned, Joshua, that the NAR initiative is trying to work on making some thorough resources for these kinds of questions, especially for gateway communities, which I would consider Tory a gateway community. In the Colorado Plateau Dark Sky Cooperative, like Daniel, we don't really get involved unless we're asked, but we think information is power. So we do have a toolkit that has a bunch of different resources for folks to learn more and empower them to talk to their elected officials and local leadership.
Now, if we could recruit students to take our classes who are from Tory, then maybe they can actually do this with their own communities.
I'll send the word down to,
I think
to
Tori's
Mary.
I think Tori's a good example. That I've done a bunch of work in Tori and helping with some of the dark sky things there. And once again, I think it gets a little extreme that we can limit light above 90 degrees, et cetera, but why don't we just shut them off at a certain hour? Things like that, and allow people to have the light that they're used to having and things like that. I think once again, it's a blending from both sides of how to do it that I think some of the things I see going on in Tori are a little too extreme because of lack of knowledge of good lighting practices.
This is Chris Lugumil. I'm in Flagstaff. I wanted to make the comment, you brought up that we need to treat people in the lighting industry with respect and include them in our discussions and help to educate them as well.
Yeah,
I agree with that 100%, but I also want to make sure that people are clear that you have to go into a relationship and an educational relationship with the lighting industry with your eyes open. And try not to get blinded by light, because they're in the toolbox of solutions that we all need to consider. Very often, and I think you just brought this up, Jim, very often, no light is a proper answer. And that is not generally a tool that's in the lighting industry's toolbox. So we need to be careful and make sure that—
I think, yeah, that's a general, yeah, I mean, that's a big discussion, because I think if you talk to people that have been in the lighting industry a lot, that know what they're doing, and dark is as important as light, and using it correctly.
Really great conversation. I will mention we do have a future webinar where we've invited the Illuminating Engineering Society to talk a little bit about their collaboration with IDA on 5 lighting principles. I think there's a couple of folks on the call, even if anyone else wants to comment on that. We do have a couple minutes left, so I'll just put out if there's any other comments or questions.
I have one more comment, if I may, or sort of a question. That is, when we consider all the myriad possibilities for efforts to mitigate lighting and to try to improve skies, it is very helpful. It's very crucial, I'd say, to have an understanding of how we quantify what is likely to be effective and what is likely not to be so effective, because we don't have enough resources to do all of the ideas that we have. So that's critical. I'm pleased to see your interest in the drone program to make some measurements, but I think it's important for us to make all of the students who are involved in these efforts as aware as possible of how do you weigh the likely bang for the buck of different approaches. If we could do it all, no big deal. You don't have to weigh the bang for the buck, but we can't do it all. So it's really critical. And John, if he's listening, even though he's muted and got his camera quiet, he's done some work on measuring light pollution, as has I. And sometimes you'll find that the things that sound the most effective may not be the most effective. So it's really important to have a good understanding of how to quantify impacts.
I will second what Chris said. We really support this idea of evidence basis for everything, and we know we need lots more study yet.
And just to piggyback on that, I think part of what we want to do once we have established a relationship, because the helper work is ongoing. It wasn't just a one and done. We are going to be sending students hopefully on a regular basis to helper, and then based on what the recommendations have been, then we can actually start asking these questions. Did you save electricity? Did the skies become darker? And that's sort of the goal of the minor. We don't want to just have a one-off relationship. All these relationships that we're building, we want them to be in the long term, not to exclude new relationships, but in order to really see over a long period of time and do evidence-based science.
I think that statement is fantastic to close on. I want to thank everyone again for participating, for your fantastic questions, for being here on a Wednesday afternoon, and especially for Daniel for presenting. Liz is going to pop a couple of last links in the chat if you want to learn more about the minor. This is going to paste a link, and then also if you want to subscribe to the NAR listserv, there's another link for that, just to keep you informed on future webinars and other tools and resources specifically aimed at supporting gateway communities and their challenges. So with that, we will wrap things up for the day. I will stay on for a minute. Again, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to future webinars. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.